Mojave Jane Doe, identified as Marina Ramos. This story begins on December 12, 1989, and it takes place on Old Temple Bar Road in Mojave County, Arizona. This is located around 50 miles south of Las Vegas. The site itself has a sad history, as other people have been found abandoned in that same area. In this case, the woman was found wearing no clothing. It was the result of someone using a knife that had led to her demise. She was in an area known as a dumping ground, and other victims have been found there. DNA would lead to more questions than answers, and the Sheriff's Office Special Investigations Unit would begin working on this case in February of 2022. And it was this investigation that would lead to her name 1 year later, in February of 2023. Marina Ramos was 28 when she disappeared from Bakersfield, California, which is about 350 miles away from where she was found. Maria wasn't the only one missing. When she disappeared, so did her 2 daughters, Elizabeth Lisa Ramos, who was 14 months, and Jasmine Maria Ramos, who was only 2 months old. Hopefully these kids are alive and okay, but there's no indication of what even happened to them. This actually reminds me, though, of the case of Harold and Tina Klaus, and they had moved with their daughter Holly, if anyone's not familiar, and their remains were found without a child. There are many reasons for taking kids that come to mind, and none of them are good. But in the case of Holly, she was adopted and had a good life. So Elizabeth and Jasmine, there's a chance they're okay, that they even had a decent life. It's also the hope that her family is holding on to. So I implore anyone who has any idea about this at all to please call the number given at the end of this video. Marina was identified thanks to fingerprints that the FBI were able to use, along with a new program that reads hard-to-read prints. This has actually given a number of people back their names. In this case, it led to a cousin who identified Marina and shared that the girls were also missing. The cousin gave her DNA, and it matched. So it was confirmed that this was, in fact, Marina Ramos. But where are the kids? They would be in their early 30s now. A sketch was released with the help of one of Marina's relatives, a woman who had cared for the girls for a while. She had cared for them when Marina was held on a shoplifting charge, which, thanks to this charge, was actually how she was identified. So it was a good thing. That relative described a man named Fernando who had been hanging around Marina. He was between 30 and 40 at the time. The last time her family saw her, she was in Bakersfield with Fernando, and that man, they did say, was Hispanic. They got into Fernando's black SUV to go to Ontario, California, where he reportedly lived. This was about 150 miles south of Bakersfield in 1989. If this rings a bell with anyone, please call the number on the screen. Marina Ramos went unidentified for 33 years. She was found 150 miles away from home. Had she survived, she would be 61 today. I've included the number for a secret witness as well as an email. You can send anonymous tips. If you have any idea what happened to Marina Ramos or those girls, or even the identity of Fernando, please call the number. Fernando would likely be in his early 60s to early 70s. Miss X, identified as Patrona Patmios. This channel covered the case of Miss X 7 months ago, so it's really exciting to see that she was one of the cases that were recently solved, with her name coming out in February of 2023. Miss X was found in Bear, Delaware, in a rural area outside of town. They knew she was very petite, and she had a distinctive body, as her bra size was estimated to be 34DD. This was pretty unusual for her height, as she was not very tall. Her teeth were in good condition, and she's not believed to have been homeless. She was transported to the location she was found in from elsewhere, and someone had covered her with a bag. The police would eventually succeed in tracing that bag, and it eventually led detectives to a laundromat that's located in Trenton. Unfortunately, although it's not clear how much time passed, by the time they were able to track down the laundromat, the man who owned the business at the time had passed away. However, relatives had worked there before and had taken over the business. It was they who believed they had seen her visit the laundromat, but they didn't know her name. She was eventually buried in Potter's Field in Delaware. Her COD was sepsis, and the reason for this is believed to be a word I can't say on YouTube. Let's just say that she was pregnant and didn't want to be. And she did something that was illegal in 1967, and this procedure led to an infection. Roe v. Wade was decided in 1973, so this had happened 6 years prior to that happening. And she, like so many before her, would succumb to infections after receiving this illegal procedure. The result of these back alley procedures led to a lot of deaths at the time. It looks like she was about 12 weeks along when the procedure took place. Her passing was considered foul play, and I imagine the suspect is the person who did the procedure. It made me wonder how fast sepsis occurs, and please take this with a grain of salt. It appears that sepsis can occur within 12 hours, although often it's 24 to 48. They noted that a soap-like substance was found within the expected cavity. The procedure had happened not long before. A little more investigation led to me learning that soap was actually used in these procedures, which I hadn't actually heard of. It was dangerous, and it could even lead to an air embolism, as well as causing a fatty liver in those who survived. I think the reason I dug into this and what is bothering me the most is that she was not wearing clothing when she was found. Someone took her and dumped her without the dignity of clothing or a name. I'd originally believed that they left her in her underwear and covered her with the sack, but no, her legs were actually inside of the sack. They likely used it to transport her there. This one bothers me on multiple levels. It's not just the desperation that she was probably feeling, or the fact that I suspect some people will believe that she deserved what happened to her, which, for the record, I do not. But it's the idea that someone's first inclination was to wipe her identity away and dump her off without clothing as if she was garbage. She had to be so desperate, and she probably did what may have felt like the only option. So even if the person who did this didn't know her name, which I doubt, they would let years pass on and on without offering any information of what they knew, even as a random tip. Her case was re-examined in 2011 when a vial of her blood and a hair ribbon were found in an evidence container. It turned out to be a huge stroke of luck, because in 1967, there was no such thing as DNA processing, and saving the blood was unusual for the time. So it was a huge, huge stroke of luck that this was even found. They most likely never could have gotten useful DNA from her bones at the time. And then, of course, most people were embalmed, and that too makes it even harder to get DNA that is even usable. But despite what seemed like a stroke of luck, she was entered into CODIS and there were no matches. It would take uploading to a genealogy database that would eventually lead her to family in Virginia and North Carolina. But they were really distant matches, and nobody knew who she was. As a result, her case was put on hold. And this actually happens a lot in a lot of these cases. We have a lot pending right now that are on hold until there are more uploads into Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch. So if you could keep that in mind and consider possibly uploading your DNA kits into those places and giving permission for it to be searched. If you don't know how, there's a link in the description below all of these videos. Thankfully, they didn't give up. Her half-brother, who lives in Greece, not in America, would decide to upload his DNA with the hopes of finding his sister. It's a little muddled, but it appears he saw the related result rather than a genealogist seeing it, and it was he who would reach out to Delaware authorities with the help of a relative who speaks English. I'm sure he hoped for a more positive result, expecting to find his half-sister alive, but it did lead to her having a name once again. Patrona went by the name of Patra. In 2020, one of her relatives had in fact posted on Facebook looking for her. So many of these relatives usually think the person walked away, So it's shocking when they find out that they didn't, that they've been in a sort of limbo all that time. Patra was born in Greece, and she had immigrated to the United States in 1955. This explains why many of the matches were not in the U.S. When she was around 9 years old, she came over with 2 other family members. And that can be seen here. The distance of many of her family members added to the difficulty in finding her, and she'd been living in the U.S. about a decade when she found herself pregnant and desperate. In 1967, she would have been around 20 or 21 when she made a choice that would eventually lead to what happened to her. Anyone with further information is asked to call the number on the screen. Patra went unidentified for 55 years. Had she lived, she'd be 75 today. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss new episodes. So if you enjoy the content here and you're not sure, take a peek to see if you're subscribed. Take care of yourselves and each other.